welcome back everybody to this afternoon session of the UK Internet Governance Forum, and we're going to start the afternoon with reporting from our session moderators from this morning's sessions. And first we will have the session on the INR stewardship transition, and if we could have just a few words of what happened in that session, that would be great.
So thank you, Olivier. The eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed that I'm not Chris Marsden. Chris I saw departing at high speed out of the building about a quarter of an hour ago. He's obviously had the same toxic reaction to debate on internet governance as the rest of us. So if you will indulge me, I will do the report back, having been actually one of the panel participants. So three key points, I think, came out from our conversation. The first of which was the importance of the IANA transition, or as actually some of our participants pointed out, the NTIA transition. In other words, the transitioning out of the US government from oversight of the IANA function and indeed oversight of ICANN. The importance being actually really concrete and practical, and not just a very abstract debate about internet governance of the kind that we often have. Because, of course, that core root zone management function that IANA perform is absolutely critical to the continued operation and usability of the internet as we all know and love it. So that was the first, I think, key insight, just a recognition generally amongst participants that this stuff really matters. Second, we focused a little bit on the challenging timetable that's been set by the US government and the actually quite complex nature of the complex and multi-dimensional nature of the debate that's taking place. So there are issues actually about how you substitute for the contractual relationship that the US government currently has with IANA. What takes the place of that to guarantee that from a customer's perspective, IANA continues to function within its SLAs and to a high degree of technical excellence. There's a debate about the ultimate accountability of ICANN as the custodian of that function and also the policy-making body in the DNS space. And there the points were made that there are actually some indispensable questions or some unavoidable questions that have to be answered as a prerequisite to making the IANA transition. So it will not be acceptable in the future for ICANN to mark its own homework in terms of its performance, and we need some mechanism which substitutes for the kinds of things which the Department of Commerce has previously been able to do through the affirmation of commitments process and through retendering as if you like, the ultimate nuclear option. And then the third thing really was just a recognition of the importance of the understanding the scope and mission of ICANN and what changes or adjustments might need to be made to that as part of this process. So we recognize that the US government has set certain conditions which are in effect principles that should guide any future structure. And we had a debate about whether there are other principles or tweaks to those principles that might be necessary in order to future-proof that organization so that we don't have to come back and change the fundamental mission and vision of ICANN again in 3 years' time. So I thought that was an important takeout, actually. That's clearly an issue that will require some very careful thought about how ICANN's role and focus and custodianship, as it was described by one of the participants, should be embedded in a way which gives us all comfort that it won't lurch off in some odd direction in the future. So that's my summary of our session. I would invite anyone who violently disagrees with that summary and who is in the session to speak now.
I ducked just in case. Nigel.
Did you consider the other two IANA functions or just the DNS function?
That's a very interesting point. We noted that there's a tendency towards DNS centricity in the debate about the IANA function. The point that was made actually was that as regards the other functions that IANA currently performs, they're relatively less controversial than the DNS aspect of this, partly because there's less scope for policy in its broadest sense to somehow contaminate the technical performance of IANA. So I think, to give you a concrete example, one of the things that we talked about was the apparently straightforward technical question of how do you deal with a delegation request as regards the DNS can be highly political when it relates, for instance, to a failed state or a state where there are more than one administration that claim to be the legitimate authority. So there are some, recognizing that danger of DNS centricity, we still think some of the really problematic challenges relate to that DNS function rather than the other technical functions which IANA performs.
As long as that decision was consciously made, then I'm very happy with that.
Any other questions? Oh, I see Khaled Fatal.
Just a quick question. This is Khaled Fatal again. A clarity on the transition, and I'm full supportive of the transition. I've been calling about this for many, many years. Does Congress require to vote on the final decision to transition or not? Or is the final decision in the hand of the administration, whether it's current or future administration after the US elections, or is it a combination of what? I think that clarity needs to be made so at least we know what challenges are. Short of this, all of this might be an exercise in futility, and I hope it's not.
So we didn't actually talk about that, and I'm now about to reveal my towering ignorance of US constitutional law. What we did talk about was if you like, the practical realities, the political realities of the timetable. So I think everybody was agreed that if this is not done before the start of the US presidential election season, the first primary, I can't remember when it happens, but I think it's early in 2016, then effectively all bets are off, because this is already a highly charged issue in the US. It's already an issue that's under active discussion. It seemed to us very unlikely that if the matter was not resolved in a satisfactory way before the initiation of that election process, we're not going to sort it this time around. It will inevitably just kind of wither on the vine.
Thank you. At the back, Alejandro Pesanti.
Alejandro Pisanti, just to address this point, and then I'll add one more comment. For all we know, I mean, I'm not directly involved in ICANN and its management of this transition, but as far as I have been, and Jean-Jacques here may be more specific than I am, it is, so far as we know now, and we means a big collective public, the transition is within the executive's authority. The executive signed the agreements and established the policies, signed the agreements, evolved, signed new agreements, and so forth. And that's within the executive's purview. There's an authority. There are attempts to use the U.S. legislative, what you refer to, Khaled, as Congress, to change the parameters, to establish more boundaries and more conditions. So far, this is what we can see even in the press, is attempts to have a congressional law that orders NTIA not to do the transition, or not to give up their function, or that undercuts their ability to do so by restricting the budget. They cannot earmark, let's say there's no earmarked budget for that function coming out of some committees in the U.S. Congress. Previous experience would make me more blasé about this. We have seen, 15 years of ICANN politics in the U.S., where you see that group that says the U.S. invented the internet and we are not going to yield control. This is a tendency that I don't want to disqualify it because I don't intervene in other countries' politics, but It's a tendency that says, you know, this is red, white, and blue, and they will take it off my, they will have to pry it off my cold, dead fingers. The internet is American trend. What has been possible in many cases has been to trace the congresspersons, the representatives who have been very active in these views, pushing them to congressional committees here, etc. Previously, we were able to trace them in using the classical technique of follow the money to districts where big companies were influential in the political campaigns. This time, there seemed to be a bit more out of control or unpredictable factors. So it's something you have to watch. Legally, it doesn't seem to change things, and they would have to pass a massive legal resolution that so far it doesn't seem to be a reasonable forecast. And about this same point, and something that was discussed in the panel, you mentioned, Alex, among others, that the timetable doesn't seem very realistic. I would urge everybody who thinks that the timetable is not, this is a personal statement. Every one of us who doesn't think that this timetable is realistic should say so now and state what would be a realistic timetable looking into the future. Because otherwise, what's going to happen is that it will be August 31, 2015. The transition may not be ready, and it will be ICANN's fault. And if it's not going to be ICANN's fault because the issue is much more complex, let's signal it in advance and either compress everybody's timetable to be able to do some transition that's visible at that time, but just make sure that the blame doesn't go again on the single focal point.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. And we've got a comment or a question from a remote participant. I'll turn over to Laura.
Thanks, Olivier. We have a question from Youssef, who is joining us from Nigeria. It's related to the session that's just happened on the IANA function, but it is connected to ICANN. I want to ask, why is ICANN not assigning a particular body for individual countries to make things easy for assigning IP addresses? For example, my country, Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. I'm not quite sure whom that question could be pointed to. I see Jean-Jacques. I think the question deals with the allocation of IP addresses on a per-country basis rather than globally, and I'm not quite sure how to frame that.
So if it's on IP addresses, the way IP addresses are allocated is that you have blocks of IP addresses which are available at global level, and they are then given, if you will, by ICANN to regional internet registry organizations. So in Europe, and actually for a lot of Europe, Middle East, and some of Asia, it's an organization called RIPE, Réseau IP Européen, and they are in charge of doing this with the community regionally. So it goes to the local level.
So why not on a per-country basis?
So for Nigeria, it's an organization called Afrinic, which is based out of Mauritius, but covers the whole of Africa. And so they would be the ones who Nigeria would be dealing with for IP addresses.
Okay, thank you. I realize we're straying off the topic, so back to IANA. Any other questions or comments? Okay, let's move over then to Louise for the second workshop, and that's the governance of cyber security. What are the takeouts from that?
We had a very lively discussion, starting with an overview of global legislation that exists and inevitably getting into Snowden. But the main takeouts were that it would enhance the UK and European view if, when people from this country are talking about human rights on the internet, they refer to the global agreements that almost all countries have signed up to, like ICCPR, rather than the European Convention of Human Rights, because that would have much more resonance, and there are only about 3 major countries, China, Saudi Arabia and Malaysia, who are not signed up to that convention. The second point was that the UK needs to push for agreements that enable faster legislative and police response to criminal activity on the internet. The time taken to deal with things is way out of kilter with the time it takes to commit the crime. The third thing was there needs to be a real transparency of data collection, both by government and commerce. It was said government and Google, but I think we know what that means. And you need institutions for oversight, and that's a really vital part. And the UK should be leading the way in having proper institutions for oversight that are transparent so that people understand what is happening. The fourth point was, we had quite a debate about anonymity, that anonymity is essential in some situations, and that people shouldn't just think that bad things are done in the name of anonymity. And certainly when I'm talking to UK MPs, I always point out to them that things like Mumsnet, which they are very fond of, are anonymous. And that is because you need protection in a personal way in that forum, in the same way that activists in repressive regimes need protection. The fifth point was that the UK should push for more protection against corporate espionage. And this is an area where the UK has a very good reputation. It has very respected laws of contract and arbitration. And it is really important going forward. And now we've got to the stage where many developing countries who didn't perhaps respect intellectual property are creating it themselves and therefore have a desire to protect it as well. So we think this would be pushing against an open door. It was agreed that we need to have a debate on the ethical issues of big data exploitation by both governments and industry. And we need to remember that it's not only active use of big data, but big data is being collected passively about us, and we need to cover both of those areas, and it needs to be an open discussion. And finally, we said that the UK government should be spending more time on educating people on basic cybersecurity rather than legislating. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Louise. Any comments or questions on this topic? Seeing no one put their hand up, I think we'll go to the third topic, and that was IPv6 adoption or IPv6 migration. I'll go quickly through the discussions we had. So the review of IPv6 adoption shows that the UK is unfortunately still lagging behind its European neighbours, although there now appears to be a slow uptake, which is likely to rise polynomially, and this is something that's been found in other countries as well. Several factors point to this. Whilst up to a year ago we had a case of chicken and egg scenario, no content, no demand, which one would come first? There appears to have been a lot more content on the net now that is IPv6 accessible with all of the services by the main information providers out there. All equipment currently rolled out is IPv6 compatible, and it replaces older equipment through the natural life cycle for the most of it. And even customer premises equipment, the end modem which people had at home, even these now are proposed by not one, not two, but a dozen vendors, and at the same low cost as they used to have before. So in general, the ISPs that are rolling out higher bandwidth speeds are able to provide the new modems at a low cost. The only alternative around is CGN, carrier-grade NAT. Carrier-grade NAT, and this is not going to be around forever. CGN has a cost, not only per user, but also per number of sessions that are going through the network address translation. For a Yahoo web page, for example, 140 sessions, concurrent sessions at the same time, and there are some modern web servers that require even more when you deal with streaming or when you deal with other types of services, especially when you have apps that you now run on your mobile, and you can run several apps concurrently, and of course that requires more ports in the carrier-grade NAT. So ultimately the economics of carrier-grade NAT don't favor the use of that technology, and certainly as far as scalability is concerned, it's a lot harder to scale network address translation than to actually scale IPv6, which is made for specifically for the scaling up. So the increasing cost of staying with IPv4 is becoming significant, and there really is no excuse for not running IPv6. So the panel concluded that implementing IPv6 is a natural way forward. I know we've said that in the past, but slowly the barriers to adoption are falling down one after the other, and certainly the issue of cost is going to be really determining factor for ISPs. Some ISPs have actually made the calculations and have consciously gone for IPv6 as a strategic way forward in order to be able to expand and to continue operations in the future. And that's the takeaway from the IPv6 session, hopefully with a better takeaway a year from now, who knows. So any questions or comments on this topic? Seeing no one put their hand up, I think we can move to the next session. Oh, there's a question at the back. Okay.
Thank you. Yes, so what actually was the reason decided on why the UK was lagging its European counterparts?
Good question, and I don't think that we actually put our finger on this. What was the actual, why is the UK different? Is it different? It's just one of these things. I'm not sure if any of the people who were in the session would be able to have an idea, but we didn't actually put our finger why the adoption is so slow. Alain?
Yep. So, I mean, to be honest, I don't think this is unique to the UK, but countries that are lagging behind in terms of adoption of V6, that comes into two reasons primarily. One is they're not necessarily growing the IPv4 base fast enough to actually fill the lack of IPv4 addresses. So in well-established market, right, when the penetration is 99% maybe, you may not feel that. There is one caveat to this, which is mobile. The mobile infrastructure do feel the lack of IPv4 addresses, so this is likely where you're going to see V6 adoption first. And actually, some mobile operators are actually doing it or planning to do it. This is also where the adoption is going to be the fastest because of the speed of churn of the mobile devices as opposed to the fixed line.
Yeah, thank you, Alain. And I learned something in that many, or some ISPs are actually seeing a decrease in customers on their fixed ISP offering because, of course, the highest growth today is mobile. And that's again, something which at the moment, I think some of the mobile providers are providing internet through a carrier-grade NAT type of system, and that is unsustainable if it's going to grow, if there's more use of that. Laura, I saw you wave your hands at the back. Did you have? No, it was just a point. Okay, so I see no other hands up, so I guess we can move. Well, first I have to thank all the rapporteurs for these sessions, and I gather that we'll have a written text that maybe we can put together at the end of the day and send as a takeaway from UK IGF. And now we're going to be in the next session, which is the Network Filtering Plenary. I invite Simon Milner from Facebook, Damien Miles from Family Online Safety Institute, David Austin, the British Board of Film Classification, and Jim Killick, the Open Rights Group, and invite you over to the table. Thank you.